everybody. My dad thinks his podcast is amazing, so please subscribe, give it 5 stars or whatever, and maybe he'll finally stop talking about it. Anyways, welcome to Sobriety.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. Today is a very, very special week for me. Bringing on a guest of mine that I've kind of grown up into the sobriety world with. He is a founder of the Noise Room. He's a performer. He's a producer. He is, without a doubt, my favorite chat moderator in my meetings. Let's welcome to the show, STATiC. STATiC, welcome to the show, buddy. How are you?
Good. How are you? I'm glad to be here.
So I didn't know if you made it to my speaker share back in April or not, but at the end of it, I thanked a bunch of people and also thanked you. And there was a big reason for that. So as I've talked on an earlier podcast, and I've told Jessica every day, I have a list of about 10 to 15 things that I do daily, and I check them off. Number one, by far, is don't drink or gamble. But number two, I actually got from you, and that is don't be an asshole. And I've done that for a long time. Now, I can't always check that off, I'm going to be honest. And Jessica reminds me of that daily, but I try. So my question to you is, where in the hell did that come from? What came about that don't be an asshole? Because I hear it very often from you.
Yeah, and it's funny. The phrasing, first of all, was I just blurted it out that way that day, and it kind of caught, and I was like, oh, I probably should have rethought that. But if it works, it works. So
That's right.
I realized right away when it wasn't just about drinking, because once alcohol was out of my life, I experienced being an asshole more, more insanity, and I realized there's a lot to do with my brain. And that was my third time trying, and I was still doing it on my own. I didn't realize there was help. I knew there was help, but I wasn't listening. That's what happens. We don't listen to people's suggestions sometimes. And until I went to a program of recovery that I work, which is basically spiritually based 12-step recovery. Early on, even when I had the first people around me that knew a little more, after 11 months of me being an asshole without alcohol, they would say things like, this is where you learn to adjust your attitude, where you start digging into your character defects. So as that stuff starts becoming really evident of like what makes me tick, why would I be the way I was? Why did I use alcohol as a coping mechanism, maybe to deal with different aspects of my own personality that really need to be dealt with directly? And in short, the funniest thing to look at for me is like, I'm naturally in the resting state of an asshole. Like, I'm just going to wake up as an asshole. And as I became further away from the idea that drinking was even I'm not saying drinking is not a thing, but I don't wake up thinking about alcohol, but I still have to check myself. And the long list of potential character defects or attitude adjustment that is necessary, like you said, a list that you do per day, like my list is to hopefully adjust my attitude and attend to my behaviors. And the quickest way is I'm just not going to be an asshole today, because I need that goal. And I like the simple mindsets that we remind ourselves. Today, we're just not going to drink, one day at a time. And I'm also going to try not to be an asshole, because that's, I come from a place where we have principles that we are taught to live inside and outside of our recovery meetings. So to live my principles outside means not being an asshole to other people around me. We right. Just said that word a lot. That's hence why I wanted to rethink it, because it took, and everybody's saying it. I'm like, oh wow, that really caught. It's not as nice as those old time sayings that everybody has, right? There's like all these great ones, like pillow to pillow, and
that's right.
And one day at a time is brilliant. There's me. I show up like, I'm just gonna try not to be an asshole today.
Be an asshole. And I love it.
But it works.
And it really has caught on, I will say.
Asshole's a good word, though. I think that the reason it catches on is because that really is more so what you call yourself,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, man, I'm being an asshole.
It's playful enough.
Yeah.
You're not
it.
really destroying you're not taking down your own character, right? By saying that. It's just depending on where you grew up and how the word was used, when people used it, it wasn't awful. They weren't like condemning me to death. My mother would say funny things like that. You're being kind of an asshole right now. It's like, oh.
Yeah, it's like just harsh enough that it makes the point, but it's not like so hard that it's, offensive. Yeah. I like it. Yeah, asshole. That's
you can look it up. It probably connects to the whole thing that we call donkeys asses.
Yeah.
And now we're connecting a little more of its anatomy and what that does. Nothing important or informative comes out of that part of the donkey.
To deviate for a tiny minute, there is actually, have you ever looked up, I mean, I'm sure you have, but like the origin stories of a lot of the profanity that we use today? And it really makes you second guess some of the things that you're saying.
Yeah.
That's a little fun little, if you can't sleep at night, look up the history of popular profanity.
All words are like that.
Yeah.
Profanity is really good. It's like rooted in deep, dark history.
Oh yeah, that must be interesting. That must be a deep dive. But all language is very important like that. So even when reading literature that's like self-caring or self-help literature, or if we're in other programs that their books might have came out 70 years ago. When I first was a part of the recovery program I was part of, they told me, here's the book and get an old dictionary. Because the words were used differently just as recent as 50, 60 years ago. And when we're trying to really empower ourselves, I really want to know the depth of the word. So it's a really cool study in general that our words are just not the same, even maybe not decade to decade, but generationally.
Yeah. So you've been sober for 12 years now, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Coming up on 13. What obviously, I know you've talked before, the path wasn't linear, getting there, but like, what was the moment you realized, man, I've got to get this shit under control. I'm done with this. That kind of started like your real day one, like where you were up till today.
So this round, because I've tried 2 times prior, has been consistent since. So that morning, March 9th, 2012, something needed to change. And without a program of recovery to attach all the befores, that moment there was, I was involved in a relationship with somebody that made observations prior, because I guess we met in November of that year, or March, not March, like 5-6 months before. And she would observe things. She's like, that doesn't seem normal. Like the way you drink, like when you do drink, because I didn't drink every day at that point. I was on a different health quest. I found I was allergic to wheat and I had inflammatory things and I couldn't eat this food. So I was like, kind of thought I was doing all the right stuff. And then I started actually binge drinking more, or I thought it would be cool. Like, I'll make some gluten-free pasta and drink 3 bottles of wine. It's like, no, that's not healthy either. So anyway, it got so bad. And, I remember her saying a few times prior, like, I didn't sign up for this. And now as I was getting to know her, she had a lot of friends that were involved in recovery. So she's been exposed, that person, to sober people. So she could see the difference between, as we would call them, the normies, the regular occasional drinkers, and the me.
Right.
And that night was brutal. I don't remember how I got home. I guess we lived on 2 different coasts. So normally we probably had a phone time where we always kind of checked in every night. It was probably 11 o'clock for me on the East Coast. And my phone was dead. I was out somewhere. I was at I think some kind of jam, and I just was going way too hard. And what woke me up in the morning was my Skype, because I guess I left my laptop on next to my bed, and she was contacting me through Skype. And if you ever use Skype, it has that really obnoxious, you're going to wake someone up, use that Skype tone. And she's like, this has to stop. This is not good. She said, I thought you were dead. I couldn't find you. Your phone's dead. And it seemed really serious. And I remember getting up and feeling like the worst I've ever felt in my life, physically, probably emotionally too. And then looking out my front door little window, and my car was parked in a weird way, like on the curb and off the curb with my trunk open. I'm like, I don't even know why my trunk's open. And it just all became real at that point. Trying to stop prior, knowing that that's when it was like, well, you tried stopping prior. I mean, this is obviously a thing you need to deal with. And then I guess I respected whatever that relationship meant at that time, and somebody being truly, truly concerned and saying the right things for me to be like, okay, yeah, I need to change this. So then, yeah, I just stopped.
Yeah. And with the line of work you're in, I mean, I can't imagine the toughness of that. Cause you said so in this last stint, the 12 years, was that when you said you went like 11 months where you basically white knuckled it? It was just kind of on your own?
Yeah. So the last stint, the stint I'm in now, is 12 years, but the first sorry, there's a light behind me. It's bothering me. The first 11 months, again, was without seeking help. There was a difference, though, because it took me time in recovery to realize that relapse is a part of my story. Because I thought because I showed up for help the first time and now I'm sticking with it. But then when I understood the depths of and so for me, there's words that I use that I'm fine with. I identify in the classical sense of alcoholism, just as they would in old recovery books. I had no physical dependency on alcohol or drugs. I wasn't physically addicted, so I didn't need to have a detox, which doesn't mean anything because the actual definition of what I taught alcoholism, which I was taught alcoholism is due to compulsion. So it's the phenomena of craving, meaning if alcohol touches my system, every good idea I had, every sense of reason or sanity is gone. I have no ability to stop. And then when I'm not with alcohol, I have a mental obsession. So the mental obsession is not sitting around just thinking about alcohol. It's mental obsession at its fullest. All my behaviors start getting altered. Everything I exist for is this thing that alcohol is controlling me to knock me off any good idea I had again, to even get to the point where I might pick up a glass. Back to phenomena craving, we have, that version of described alcoholism. So I believe I am an alcoholic of that nature. And what was important for me during that time learning is I could identify phenomena craving before the first time I tried to stop drinking. And I actually identify the mental obsession being part of what brought me back to drinking the first 2 times I tried to stop. Problem was I had no one around me. I didn't know about this stuff or no help. This time was different. Based upon her and her friends, thankfully we were all in the music industry, they were kind of around me when I said, yeah, the drinking did not work out, I'm stopping. And they would politely slide in information. No one forced me. Early on, like, hey, you want to go to a meeting? I'm like, nah, I don't need that. They're like, okay. And no one said anything. And then they would show up and talk about these interesting magical topics and these terms. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I realized again, in hindsight, they were bringing recovery language and concepts and checking in to me, even though I was resistant. So my first tour, I guess, was late April, early May. So that's not really too long. That's 2 months in. I happened to show up on a tour where the opening band had 3 sober guys in it. So every day, this guy was basically giving me a meeting in between sound check, which even though he said, hey, I go to meetings every day, I'm like, oh, I don't do those. He's like, all right. He said nothing and then showed up and gave me the same meeting and just kind of setting up while I had somebody at home that was a musician talking to me about it, saying things like, how's it going out there? You find people that drink water after shows and like whatever, little tips. So there was this all kind of conditioning until my mind took over again and I was just losing it. And I remember calling that same guy, not the one from the tour, the other musician, and he started to help me understand the difference between problematic drinkers, heavy drinkers, moderate drinkers, and hopeless alcoholics as defined by that program. And that still took me 2 months, but I at least had this understanding. And then I was with people in the studio, a lot of sober people in the studio. And I'm like, these people are amazing. They have no ego. They're functional. They're doing everything they love. They're laughing about everything. And I was really blown away by the experience. And then I said to one of them, I go, do you ever see, everybody was around Super Bowl. I'm like, on these commercials, like you see beer and it makes you want it. And I think just in that kind of like dim, innocent way of asking, he looked at me and goes, well, how long has it been since you had a drink? I go, I don't know, 11 months. He's like, have you tried going to a meeting at all? And I go, no, but I'm like, I guess, because I'm like, I don't feel right about this. They're like, yeah, maybe you should go. And I knew I was going home the next day, meeting from California, New Jersey. And I texted somebody I knew was also sober, whatever my understanding was then. And I said, I messaged him, like, I know you mentioned not drinking anymore, but do you go to get help? They're like, I go to these meetings. I'm like, yeah, I think I need to go. And they sent me a list, huge list of all the ones I could go to where I'm from. And I remember I got home and a day later I went to my first meeting and it was incredible. Horrifying. I thought they were insane, but looking back, it was incredible.
Yeah.
So, I listen to all these guests. I live with Ryan, and I've talked about it on previous podcasts. I don't know how many of them you've listened to, but my brother's been sober for 4.5 years. And I always say pretty much everyone I love and adore in my life has struggles with substance abuse, which, you know, there's some psychology to all of that too. But I have a lot of mental health stuff, you know, I'm ADHD, OCD, generalized anxiety, and my diagnoses are, you know, they just keep rolling in, which is a really fun time to have. But a few things, and I hope I'm going to articulate this the right way, you know, because the way that people's brains process information is different. So when I was hearing you say about, you know, the whole don't be an asshole thing, right? With my anxiety, something that I had realized with lots of help and therapy and, you know, all these things was some, not all, but some of my anxiety was more overstimulation. So when I first got diagnosed as ADHD and OCD, I was like, okay, you know, like that's not a thing. Because I have a lot of executive dysfunction where I would sit, you know, and he would like come home and say, well, what'd you do today? And I'd say, you know, you're looking at it. He's like, okay, well, so are you like, you rested, you relaxed? I'm like, anything but, anything but. And you get stuck in this vortex. So I always, you know, women and ADHD, I always associated it with this like hyperactive, like, you know, 12-year-old little boy who's like flicking boogers at everybody, right? And we now know most things, if not everything, is on a spectrum. And I went on like a mental health spiritual journey as well, which I'm still on. And so I realized that the majority of my anxiety was really just an overstimulation of my nervous system. So I'm a very big sensory person, you know, I flew my entire life and then all of a sudden, boom, have flight anxiety, and I'm working through that. But it's like, you know, the anticipation of the trip and preparing and the noise and not knowing. And the reason I bring this to when you said don't be an asshole, even when you stop drinking for 11 months, do you think that's a lot of it too? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sensing some like neurodivergent twin telepathy going on here. I can smell it from a mile away.
Yeah. Good instincts.
And that was something that really baffled me. You know, I'm like, am I irritable? Am I this? Like, I get overstimulated. My clothes, noises, questions, interruption of hyperfocus. And I thought it was a really big self-realization. But as I'm talking to other people who navigate this world together, I find that it's kind of the same way too. Like, are you an asshole or are you just overstimulated?
Well, the quick answer to that is, regardless where it comes from, if it affects others, I'm still accountable for my behaviors.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
But you're also hitting all the points, because it's my way of applying all that I've been given through 12 steps to later diagnoses that never would have happened if I didn't get sober. So 10 years into my journey, there's a lot was going on. It didn't make sense. Like on paper, everything should have been fine. I was like so involved in my recovery programs. I was going to meetings all the time, and just like sober wise, like I felt everything was on, but not everything was on for my life. And that's when I was suggested to go see a therapist because we thought I had depression issues. It turned out that wasn't it. It was just a major life change, because it was also 2020. 2021. So I'm originally from the New York, New Jersey area, and my whole world came crashing down with, amongst other people's worlds coming crashing down. But in the live entertainment industry, everything was just closed, and I had to rebrand, redo everything. And it wasn't like the boohoo what happened to me. It's just that my new life required me to be home. I was never home. I moved around. I had so many challenges, and in a good way, like every day, like just playing a live show is like you're setting up, you're doing all these things. It's so exciting. And then you do it again. Well, when I would do like video editing projects and just be like burning candle on both ends, because that's my tendency. And then on Monday is supposed to be the rest day. I would be so depressed. I felt like the biggest piece of shit on the planet. And all this stuff caused me to go see a therapist. And it proved, like, even before that, I said things every time I would do a speaking commitment as an alcoholic. I would say when I was When I was a little kid, I felt like a 4,000-year-old alien trapped in a 4-year-old's body. And every time I got older, I was still this 4,000-year-old alien. Wasn't able to relate with kids at all. I only talked to adults. I would stack things. I was obsessed with Legos. And I'm sitting here, like, even in these speaking commitments for years, writing out everything to do with many aspects of neurodivergence. So it's all connected in the end, but it did. I don't think, like, people right away like, well, since you found that out, do you think that's why you're an alcoholic? It's like, no, I'm an alcoholic because I'm an alcoholic. Is it a contributing factor? Absolutely. I've basically needed medicine and didn't know how to get it. Didn't know there was anything to diagnose. I'm going to be 48 in like 2 months. So they weren't looking for that, because the hypertensive thing you're talking about, what women go through in the mental health world, was because women weren't doing the outbursts that boys were doing for the classic ADD assessment, which is nothing to do with what this really is. And I fell into the same category. I was a hyper-focused person who was generally well-behaved, who you couldn't really see certain signs, and knew how to cope and get by. So I was off the radar. And it just became a long time of self-medicating to deal with this thing, which is spinning off the rails. And it could, again, easily make me an asshole. And I believe when I say it, in the recovery environment, it's still an important factor for us to pay attention to our behaviors. But I also believe it heavily connects. And I feel like I've been given this experience to have it so friggin' magnified by all the same reasons you listed. If something too much is going on, I'm overstimulated, the response you're going to get out of me is usually not the best response. So it's the not be an asshole was really said to remind myself. Everything I say is to remind me in the end, and hopefully it reminds other people. But that's kind of what I've been really dealing with more than ever these last 2 or 3 years, because like you said, our acronyms, they tend to grow. You're like, wow, here you go, I got more.
That's right.
Which I borrowed from one of the people in the meetings, that because I do the neurodivergent meetings now. It's like a subgroup in did we mention it by name? Is that what goes on here? Reframe?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Reframe is a known entity. So someone was amazing. They're like, I have a bunch of acronyms. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the best way to describe it. Because like in the end, it's like, what is it? I don't want to call things a disability. It's not a disability. Yeah. It's disorder. I mean, even some of them have them in the title, but I'm not here to tell you if it's a disorder or not. It's like, what is it? It's this thing. It's me. And a lot of it I take as I am, on the spectrum and yada, yada. But when they say I have my acronyms, I'm like, that is the best way to describe it.
So another question, I have lots of questions. And I talked a lot about this when we had Mickey on the podcast, because she is an actress, a musician, and I grew up in performing arts. Again, never anything professional, but danced for 15 years, did all the things, and singer, all of that. And what I found with my neurodivergence is, and this is actually a two-parter. Because I grew up in that world, same thing, I presented as very normal. And for those of you listening, I'm using air quotes because I try to avoid using that word, but here it's very intentional. Good student, didn't get in trouble, did all of the things. But it's also because I could mirror and match, and I learned how to flip things on and off. Like I remember in high school, and you talk about acronyms, this is not the same, but same line of thinking. We had to learn Chaucer lines, Canterbury Tales, and we had to recite them to our English teacher. And for me, memorization is very rhythmic, right? So I created a rap to my Chaucer lines, and they were perfect. Now, if you ask me to speak them to you, come on. Yeah. Okay. It's not going to happen. And it goes back to that. If I'm following this equation, if I'm presenting in this way, then everything goes off without a hitch and is perfect. But when you deviate from that, it all falls apart. And I had asked Mickey, like, did you see that was a hindrance? And when you became sober, when you really were diagnosed, because I truly believe knowledge is power, right? You're right. Like once you have that knowledge, you no longer get away with being an asshole, because now you are aware. So you really take that responsibility on because how have you seen that relationship with your music, your art? Did you find that at first it was easy to slip into that masking behavior and that worked against you? I hope I'm asking that question and intending to say what I want to say.
Oh, I
Do
fully
you
get
connect with your art better?
it. Well, it's a hard, long, not hard and long, but like the music was the first thing, was something that was non-harmful that made me feel alive once I got a guitar in 8th grade. Now, I experienced alcohol a little prior, and that was the same thing, but we're not going to look at that as something that was helpful. It might have been helping at the moment. And I am the most comfortable in my own skin on this planet when there's some kind of musical, rhythmic thing happening. It is literally my whole existence is musical. And I couldn't relate to anyone in school. And there's a lot of things that didn't click, and I didn't feel like, and as soon as I got to guitar or the ability to present through music, I'm expressing at a level that makes perfect sense for me. So music came so in a humble way, it came easily. It doesn't mean you're going to be great, but the idea that I was like, this all makes sense. At least we're not sitting in a class of algebra like I have no idea what the fuck they're trying to show me right now. But as soon as music turns on, now the problem is they still were very traditional at music. They think you need to read and all these things. That's when we found out I was dyslexic. So I was playing things backwards. And everything for me is the experience. I could hear it. You said mirror, mimic. And I'm really been deep diving that. I learned I was really masking the whole time, because what I'm dealing with is masks coming off these last 3 years. And I'm feeling things I never felt before because the masks were so, I call it armor. I built up so much functional coping based armor, but some of that will hurt us prolonged if we don't know why. And the whole way you say you learn, like, that's the same thing. It's rhythm, it's patterns. I love patterns. And I remember when they evaluated me in high school and they still couldn't figure out everything. They're like, well, if you can't write things down, how do you remember everything? I'm like, patterns. All the phone numbers, they're patterns and they're melodic, because I'm of an age where a phone made a tone and I remember people's
I
melodies.
love that you're doing this because I remember it by the pattern too. Sorry, I just had to point that out.
It happens all the time. Like, I mean, the worst thing ever was the first time I had to use my PIN number on a non-numeric keyboard. I was like, do I know my PIN number? Because of the square was there.
I remember mine by the little,
Because the phone dial. Our whole life was a phone dial. And
Ryan's like, what are you talking about?
But even patterns of music scales. People are like, how do you know all the notes on the neck? I'm like, they're all patterns. So I was learning stuff musically so much faster than my peers, because as soon as we would learn a scale once, my mind could see the guitar neck and put the dots on the pattern. So I'm just like flying through all this information. Again, it doesn't make you like amazing at the instrument, but the process of learning it, I was like, this is incredible. And I realized because the one thing that always threw me with the diagnosis is later in life is when they ask you questions, you don't know how to answer them. Because when you're getting diagnosed in your mid-40s and they didn't know yet, there's a ton of shit that I don't even know. I coped with it. I covered it. I masked it. And I do remember when digging deep with my therapist that there's a phase where I used to have almost extreme uncomfortable eye contact, because I probably had none younger and thought that's what you're supposed to do. And it also I realized that would keep me paying attention to what I need to pay attention to. Because if I'm in a public place, I hear a door open, I got to make a visual picture of who walks through the door. Every sound will grab me. I can remember everything you said. I don't have to look at anyone, but I also learned that's not polite. So yeah, in every class, I memorize everything by memory. Like, I hear it, I can't write it down. So I would get pissed off at teachers because they wanted notes. Where are your notes? Like, why do I need notes? You asked me a question, I answered it correctly. I can't cheat. This is the 80s. I didn't have one of these in my ear, and you could see this one. So it's a whole, I could go on forever about the whole discomfort of education and why drugs and alcohol were the only piece for me, because they prolonged that meditative, beautiful state music does. Music just takes away all the anxiety. Music takes away, because the thing is, or dancing, art in general, the whole experience, you have to be present. Like, imagine dancing and getting distracted. What's going to happen? You're going to fall. So you're very present. It's calming. It's a beautiful, beautiful way. It's so therapeutic. It doesn't have to be amazing. It doesn't have to be professional. It just has to be experienced.
Singing is my favorite thing in the world to do. I did dance, but that was more so driven by my mom. It was more performing arts, but singing was always my favorite thing to do. And Ryan always says, and my daughter, she has that same where she can memorize, but she's not so much into like actually singing and performing. But he's like, how do you remember all of these songs? Like, you know, all these lyrics. And I say, I don't know. Sometimes I wish I could like Control Alt Delete to make room for things that are more useful. I don't know. He's like, but you didn't remember to put the clothes in the dryer because it doesn't bring me any sort of comfort or peace of mind.
It's the patterns, though. That's why you remember all your lyrics, because you're learning.
Mm-hmm.
See, the way you learn lyrics is the way you would teach others to learn lyrics. Because you don't tell people this, hey, just read the lyrics, memorize them. You say, put them in the rhythm of the song. And then, I mean, we teach people, good teachers teach with rhythm. Even if they're not making you rap or sing songs, so you're actually have the ability to then teach someone else better based upon how you observe your own learning.
I'm a terrible teacher. Terrible.
That's the way I am too. Because I mean, I don't have a musical bone in my body,
but sports is like that way too. It's a rhythm of your body.
Being a hockey player, so I don't even remember learning how to skate. But I've had people ask me, how do you do it? How could you skate? I honestly, I couldn't show you. Now I can go out and do it, and you can mirror me or learn how to do it that way. But I can't say here's actually how you do it, because I have so much muscle memory. I just get out and boom, 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 boom.
Well, that's the best way to teach anyway, by showing. The education system is completely upside down since Rockefeller created the whole idea. Well, borrowed it, stole it. I'm not gonna go there. But that method of education is not meant to teach. It doesn't elicit critical thinking, and it only teaches to people one way. Where historically, you want to learn to do something, you find a person that does it better, and you sit next to them, and you mirror it, and you learn. You want to learn to paint? Go hang out with a painter. Not like regurgitate a bunch of information in a book about painting. That teaches me nothing. My brain works so fast in that, where I thought that was bullshit without any background. I mean, I was a kid, like, why are we learning this? This makes no sense. Like, why are you making me show my work? I could do math in my head.
Right.
Why? That was my misbehaviors. I'm thankfully I have fight as my trauma response. Probably I'm argumentative and will defend anything. So I used to get in trouble for that, like questioning teachers, and they can't even get out of the argument with me because I'd hold an argument with an adult, like. But that doesn't make sense. That's not what you said 3 weeks ago. You said if I'm able to come to this class and regurgitate the information in a verbal exam, you got a 5th grader doing that? That's like, you should know what's going on. Like, if you get pissed off because a 5th grader did that as a teacher, you're a horrible teacher. You know nothing about education and people. Because if a 5th grader is defending their stance, there's an underlying cause for that. Send them to the damn study team. Maybe they'll figure it out. Who knows?
That's right.
Maybe STATiC is like my long lost twin. That's because I'm sitting here and all I hear in my head, like anytime that, because I agree too, and our daughter goes to a very traditional school, which, whatever. But I always try to bring it back to real life scenarios. And I mean, and there have been plenty of times I've emailed teachers and been like, she's fucking exhausted, and sleep and peace of mind overpower homework. She didn't do her homework. Give her the 0, whatever. But Lily, our daughter, will literally be like, Mom, I don't need a full dissertation on why it's this way. Just show me how to do it so I can get this shit done and be done with it. And I'm like, well, but don't you want to know the why? She's like, not really. I'm tired. Which she's 13.
It's like me with everybody. Don't you want to know why? They're like, no. I'm like, but the why is how you get to do it again.
That's right.
So from now on, I just need to call STATiC and be like, I have to get this out of my head. No one in my house.
Nobody wants to know the why. They just want the result. They just want the cake, not knowing how to bake it.
He always goes, I'm going to ask you a question, and I just need the short answer. Yeah. Like, I just need the finish line.
Well, I need the ending.
That's my relationship in a nutshell.
Yeah,
Kira never wants to know the why. I'm like, but that's how you don't have to ask me every day for the same information.
Right.
That's how it is.
My father was like that, though. That's how he really did teach in that old way of mentorship and that Socratic kind of critical thinking. Me and him were fine. We never had an issue. We were always in the whys. We'd be taking apart whole lawnmowers and figuring out the gear ratios. And I was like, what are you guys doing? It's like, he's like, your son just figured out where that goes. I was like, 4. I'm like wiring things. So he knew. He probably was like this. It's just they didn't know back then, and he figured it out.
Right.
And it's funny. I love playing with words and terms. They tried to tell me I was learning disabled, and this is like my sophomore year. They finally are evaluating me, telling me that everything that I was doing, most of those tests, I was, and again, they're weird tests. I was outscoring majority of the people on the things that I'm good at, obviously, like memory. I can memorize everything because I had to. And then there was stuff that was like 0, 0, 0. All of them right. 0. It was the true imbalance. And they said, well, we realize your son's learning. I go, and they're about to say disabled. I'm like, well, why am I disabled? You're literally telling me half these things no one gets right, not even you. Don't I have a difference in learning abilities? So I love language. So my one lately has been when I hear people say traditional school, I go, actually, I call that a modern school, because traditional education is the shit we stopped doing in the late 1800s when we make people into drones, opposed to letting them learn the joy of something that actually will let them be who they become, and giving them all the information to find out who they want to be. So these schools that are going back and putting people on farms for kindergarten, and they're learning all these things, these kids are coming out so much more
Montessori.
Montessori was the beginning of waking up.
Yes. So if we had to do it all over again, we would have started in Montessori. By the time we kind of found that, it was a little too late. We applied and they were like, honestly, this is something that's ingrained. But funny story, and I know that you're itching to ask a question. I can see it. I can feel it off your energy.
You'll get all your questions. I'm not in a rush.
This is mine and STATiC's podcast. You're just there. Okay.
Do you go to the neurodivergence meetings? Like, maybe you should be on Reframe for the neurodivergent experience.
I do. I actually go, and I even told Jess, I said, it's actually become kind of one of my favorite meetings, because I'm actually learning more about myself too. I mean, she's always said that, I have these things, and I'm actually going for diagnosis next month and talk with my doctor about it. But it's funny hearing you talk and other people talk. And I'm like, wow, I did that shit, or I do that. So, maybe I do have issues that, she's telling me all the time.
They're not issues.
Well, not issues.
It's understanding how your brain functions.
I'm learning. I'm still learning.
Right.
But trying to learn how my brain works. And I've gained so much from it.
I'm glad
it's kind of wild. Yeah, actually, I really enjoy it.
We're a lot of fun. I just have to say, we have very creative minds. But I remember taking AP English in high school, and I really liked it because it was pretty much like reading and writing. And I love reading and writing because it's, there's no right or wrong answer. And I was like failing all of my reading tests. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And I think I was reading Beloved at the time, which was one of my favorite books in high school, because you can read it 100 times and get something different out of it. And I could go down a rabbit hole with that. But my teacher, this is the first time I've really had a teacher try to understand. She goes, "Are you reading ahead?" And I said, "Yeah, I just really love the book. I'm reading ahead. I feel like it can give me," she was like, "You have to stop." What? Why do I have to stop? She's like, "Well, the reason you're failing all these reading tests is because you're answering the questions 3 chapters in advance. So it's not that it's wrong. It's that we're not there yet." And she's like, "And I don't want to keep failing you because, that doesn't really seem fair." So I had to learn. Same thing with history classes. Like I am a huge history buff now. And it's funny because I sit down with our daughter and I help her with her homework. And she's like, "You just know all this stuff. You're so smart." History was I bombed history in high school because I loved the story, but the timelines, I mean, the before and the after and the dates. And I mean, I can tell you what happened and the cause and effect, but don't ask me the year or sometimes even the century, because that's just not it's,
everybody's different.
Sense?
Everybody has different skills. Yeah.
Manual interpretation of what it looks like in my brain.
It's probably more realistic timeline. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that too. I think that, the whole modern day education system is set up for capitalism. Your 9-to-5 job and fall in line and produce and that and another. So
it's got its darkness for sure. It goes deeper than that. It's not that kind of podcast though. I've been on those.
Right, not that kind of podcast.
I mean, I'm ready to dance and all that, because I think there's a whole thing going on to make people not as wonderful as we could be, but that goes way deeper than the obvious.
Yeah.
Okay, Ryan, we know you're itching.
Speaking of teaching in children, I know you work in a nonprofit. You work with Road Recovery, which is amazing, by the way. I love when you post about it, talk about it, with what you do as far as teaching music to young kids. If you want to talk about that,
so
how that came about and kind of what you do with that every summer.
To clarify that part, we're not teaching. We don't look at it as teaching. Again, we're also sensitive to it in a way, because we like the idea that we're taking our own experiences and acquired knowledge, in a sense, mentoring, which is the old form of education, for lack of a better term. Because I do have duality. Besides music, I teach music more, I guess, traditionally in a certain aspect, but in the nonprofit world, it's about youth empowerment and youth voices. But even in my helping people learn about music, I'm never really just a teacher. It's not my approach. Wouldn't know how to do that because I can't even read music. So Road Recovery is a nonprofit that was founded in New York in the late 90s. The whole premise of it is to raise youth voices and show them a place where what's going on and validate their feelings and that they matter. It was driven essentially by people from the music industry. So it started with music industry professionals that have faced their own adversities. So back then, basically a bunch of recovering addicts and alcoholics in the music industry, but it's not solely that. The idea is there's many adversities we could face. We could face having learning difficulties in school, eating disorders, mental health situations and experiences. And that is all valid. And majority of the staff at this point is from all facets of the entertainment industry that could identify an adversity and then put themselves in young people's shoes. So when we're with them, we're able to communicate across the table. We are never an authoritative figure. We're never like just, not to take away from the idea of a teacher, but we're not a teacher, because sometimes when kids are in those situations, the last person they want to be around is authoritative or teachers. And we really try to bring an experience of accountability and life skills, and we kind of hide it under the fun of the arts. So even though we might be saying like, we're going to work on this. Are you into music? Yeah, I love music. You want to learn to make beats? Sure. We're going to make some beats and maybe come up with your first song. The whole process is what makes it beautiful. It's like, okay, so next week I will bring a beat and you're going to write your first lyrics for the rap. If you need help, let me know. You're also able to, however you need the lyrics. If you can't, we make sure we're open to, like, we're not saying you need to write it down on paper. Because half that staff, we are the kids that yelled at teachers and walked out when you told us the only way is to write on paper. That's what makes it work, because we really do see ourselves in them. And even the first time I went down, thinking my connection was like, oh, I'm a sober musician now, I'm going to go help Road Recovery and be a part of that. My first day, I realized this has nothing to do with my sober journey. This actually has everything to do with my weird ass experience in school, getting shuffled from place to place, of them not knowing what was going on, and I'm able to reach and connect and understand what these young people are going through. So we do week to week, and we show them that, like, I'll be there for you if you're there for me. They get an accountability and build these life skills of just being involved, showing up, staying with your commitments. And then at the end of it, we do it in cycles, 12, 13 weeks. We do what we call a party now. It's a show, but we realize saying show sometimes will scare our kids and they won't show that day. We call it a party. We transform their area with like lights and bigger sound equipment. We bring food and we just throw down. And maybe they show off their paintings. They might have dance. Some do acting skits. Whatever expression that we could connect. I mean, cooking's expressive to me. I'll everything works for me. And the whole thing is, we don't show up with a curriculum at all. We're form fitted to what we basically absorb is needed at that place. So we're able to slip into every population, and we're all over. So that the generalization is called, you're working with a population of what they consider at-risk youth. If you looked up at-risk youth, there's a huge definition of that. So we're in places like the South Bronx and the boonies of New York State, because no matter what, there is a population of young people somewhere that need to be reached. And it usually connects with either home life, maybe they don't have the means to use computer, like these organizations. We partner up with all these different clubhouses, and then we bring in the Road Recovery program. So that's pretty much what we do with that.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
That's just one thing that I'm a part of, but that's the big nonprofit side of my life.
What else are you a part of, if you don't mind?
I still do music as much as I can anywhere I'm needed. In that sense, I work with helping empower and coach younger artists now where I live. And a lot of the experience I have in recovery and from Road Recovery, I just apply it to everyday life. So even if there's a band that's looking to really do this professionally, and there is a level now of education involved and you have to dig in and extra practice, I still bring in this human part of it that's really needed. Like, how do you communicate to your band members? Are you guys getting along? Are you being transparent? And I start building on these life skills again that are essential. And I do that side of it, as well as help them find their sound in their music. And that's, you could say that's more of an education sense. And then, so it's the music, that's the more traditional music school studio, producing artists, and the nonprofit side. So yeah, that's pretty much, I mean, I get involved in anything if I help people. Like, I love, my big passion is I guess it tends to be people I feel that were overlooked. In the last few years, it's been really connecting with veteran communities, realizing I was given skills that is very therapeutic to people that have faced such adversity like war, or anything connected to that, or that experience, or just transitioning from a lifestyle that has nothing to do with the everyday lifestyle here. So a friend of mine has his own nonprofit. He created a company that builds, like guitarists, we use all these guitar effects pedals, like we stomp on them, stomp box.
Sure. Yeah.
And my buddy is was wounded in Iraq in 2006. He's a Marine Raider. And only thing that helped him get himself back together was music, emotionally. And he loved it so much, but he realized the equipment was really expensive. So he started making it, and someone taught him to solder. And he realized the actual therapeutic nature of just fabrication. Now I hear him say that, and I'm like, wow, when I was a kid, I couldn't even deal with being my own skin for no other reason besides whatever I was given. And I would always stack things and build with Legos. So there's something very much momentary experience. Music does that. So he created a whole company called Fallen Raider Audio that literally trains and employs his fellow veterans in this experience of learning how to build these electronics. And there's a therapeutic quality, there's a sense of purpose, and there's a job, sadly, in a place where we don't help transition enough people with incredible skills and experience. And I was so touched by that. I didn't know who he was at the time. And I'm like, we're following each other because he sees I know the distributors, because I do a lot of demonstration for big music companies, like at trade shows and for videos. So I bought all the pedals first because I didn't want to come out and be like, hey, I'm actually someone who demos people's and does their videos. And as soon as I get him, I go, by the way, this is me. I'm totally into what you're doing. I'm going to make you some, can I offer some help? He's like, well, what do you want for it? I'm like, I want nothing. I'm like, I just want to record your demos, like just to give you some samples. And we got really, really, really along with it. And we ended up on like some random podcasts, like 2 different days from another guy, like mutual. And then the world just has a synchronicity. And I learned so much from what he was trying to do that I became more hyper aware of any situation I could give back in that way. And that's pretty much what I'm working on, to find out more ways to connect the music thing, the musician's experience, the sober musician's experience, and then connecting it with the veteran world to see if there's a synergy. And my big dream is finding ways for once veteran musicians could find out about something like road recovery and then give back to the youth. Because it's not that they need to give back, but it's the idea of purpose and service makes everybody who's gone through something feel better. And I just feel like it's a truly underappreciated, forgotten community in this country. So, and they're my peers. I'm 48. I didn't think about it when I was in my 20s, running around in tight pants and eyeliner. And then as I get older, it's like, these are my friends, and I'm starting to hear their stories about what they've been through. And I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. I need to serve them now.
I mean, back to your music, I can't imagine, and it's only because, again, I don't know anything about it other than, if you share a story about it. But, especially early on in your sobriety, I can't imagine going on world tours and stuff like that and remaining sober. I mean, it seems to me like it would just be one thing after another, not necessarily being on stage, but, after parties and things like that.
That's when it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Because for the most part on stage, so my band was a non-drinking stage band. We didn't drink or party at all to go on stage. We believed in that from the beginning. It was delivering the best we can for the audience, because you couldn't really sustain. And then for some of us, like me, I would seek out to keep the adrenaline going. So to keep my drinking problem became because I needed to stay up there. I wanted to. I didn't want to crash. And that was explained to me early on to be careful of that. But you know how it is. We don't listen.
That's right.
I actually find the music industry, because I don't know all the other entertainment industries, like you said, it's a really easy place to get effed up in, but it's a very easy place not to, because there's no stigma. You could either be a fucked up musician or a sober one. And unless you're playing bad shows, no one's paying attention. So like, if you're not performing poorly and you don't have a band that has an agreement, people don't question if someone's drinking or doing drugs before they get on a stage until their performance starts to lack. But when someone decides to get sober, there's so many sober musicians that are just like, okay, that's your thing now. It's not like you're not cool. I mean, there might be a small select few people that think you're not cool anymore, but they could fuck off. I mean, it's like, it's very, very slim. And it's about paying attention and realizing your purpose again. So the purpose is to have a great show, and then you find other stuff to do after. And it's like, I just think it's a hyper focused version of what I think everyday life really is. You stop drinking, but you're going to have to go to a barbecue sooner or later, right? So what do you do?
Mhm.
So when my first tours, I still do it. I brought, as a yearman, every meeting, I bring my snacks, I bring my non-alcoholic drinks, whatever that's going to be. And I have my own little station of whatever I need to make sure I don't have to think about that. And then that just made it easier in the beginning. And I had a lot of support. My band was not a party driven band. So like, yeah, I'm fortunate. Because I mean, yeah, maybe there's bands that their whole thing's like, let's get twisted. Like they're just so in it.
Yeah.
But not
Mhm.
this band. We used to wake up every morning and work out together, and we operated like a small, highly focused team with no crew because we knew we'd make more money. So we were our own setup crew. Like it was well-oiled machine. We were never late. You know, we broke the stigma already. So yeah, for me, I'm fortunate. I was able to get sober and stay sober.
Yeah. And I keep going back to Mickey. I apologize, but I mean, a lot of the things that y'all say are very parallel. Like she was saying that we are debunking and sort of tearing down this notion that you have to have an altered state of mind in order to produce creativity or some sort of art form, which was not true to begin with. But I will say that, you say you don't understand that world, but you do because you played professional hockey, and you have to think like that feeling, that rush that you get when you make a goal, or like if you were fighting in hockey or whatever and the crowd is like in it and that's your moment. I mean, that's the same as being on stage and performing. I mean, it's not just like, oh, I did a good job and it's over. I mean, it's like we'll be listening to music and I'm like, do you feel that in your chest? You're like, I mean, I feel the beat. I'm like, no, but like your body's not vibrating. But if you're playing hockey,
It's a different feeling. Yeah, I get
you're
it.
vibrating on the highest frequency.
Right.
And then after a game, you go and you drink and you party because everybody's like, oh my God, that was awesome. It's like the same kind of thing. And
Also,
so
you're trying to keep the
that
adrenaline up.
resonates. Yeah, you're
Right.
trying
That's
to
what
keep
it
it up.
is. There's a
Yeah.
moment to moment. There's such a similarity, probably more than you would have thought about, because
Mm-hmm.
in a big production band, there's no pause. Just like
Right.
like in hockey, like anything like that, things are happening at a high rate. So people who do this, you're in a rate of and you live for it. You need that. There's a few fields that would fall into that, sports, music in that level of performance, the military, there's a whole level of it's happening, and there's no like, hold on, like imagine doing that to a drummer. It's like the whole show falls. So like I've been playing and smoke is coming out of my amp, and I have to just like walk over like nothing's going on and plug into the amp next to it, not realize that there's $2,000 gone or whatever. But you don't actually think that way. You're in the zone. And the thing is, you don't feel pain anymore. So I've messed up my body because the adrenaline. So then after the show, you're like, so screw it. What's an easy way to fix that? Drugs and alcohol. So most musicians, when you go into depth with their story, it wasn't they needed the drugs or alcohol to create. It was the wrong medicine to maintain the in-betweens. And then imagine showing up and not being able to get there. Like you don't have any kind of practice where you're sitting there and you're like, I just don't feel like I get on stage. So what's a fast way? Let's check out. So I practiced all these things after, like, well, what can I do? I know I could get there anyway. I never really recorded or used anything to play. So I was like, I used to do funny things. Like in Sobriety, I found myself, even if I wore sunglasses on stage because of the lights, like we used to have one of the merch people used to always put glitter on us some way. And we weren't really a glittery band. No one even knew. We were mostly in black. And what my bandmate realized when we had like glitter in our eyes, it created this incredible, like naturally mind kind of experience, like trippy, because it's not just generic room, walls, lights, TV screens. Like it's whatever you could do to get into your zone. If it's the right tea, if it's a breathing practice, like that's the real stuff. So everything that drugs or alcohol could give you, we have the ability to get there. We just have to try. So I worked really hard in Sobriety to find all the other ways. And now I've gotten places where I never could have got, like that level of calm focus. My playing immediately got better, though. Thankfully, I knew how I played before, but it was just, you're just there because you're so present now. I always tell people who think music is not cool without drugs or alcohol, Depends on their age group. But for most people, Stevie Ray Vaughan is the greatest example. Any average person turns on any footage of someone like Stevie Ray Vaughan, he's just that kind of person that blows you away because things are happening. Even musicians were like, I have no idea. But if you look at him after he got sober, it is twice as fierce. Because when he was wasted all the time, he was lumbering. He was kind of doping around. And he's playing fast. And at times you're wondering where it's going. His singing was not as good as the record. Austin City Limits, I think he had 2 years of sobriety. Bright-eyed, so looking straight out to the audience, perfect posture, singing incredibly, playing every note matters beyond. Literally, there's that footage of him doing the guitar switch mid-song. That's from that footage. That's sober Stevie. I'm not sure that would have happened with drunk Stevie. And I'm not knocking drunk Stevie. The guy was still an incredible musician, but he was a big part of me even thinking this was the right thing to do because I found a video of him qualifying his alcoholism, way after he died. And it was like he was a year into sobriety. And I related to everything he said. Those things I'm talking about, like we could get there, but it's way easier sometimes to, do a bump and do a shot if we don't feel like treating ourselves right. It's hard work to be balanced, but it's worth it.
I'll say, just to digress for a moment, a little bit. I think that my favorite person to watch perform recently, and you may or may not know who I'm going to say, we've been to a lot of concerts, Joan Jett. Holy fucking
she's a machine.
She was incredible.
I was like, I want to get her phone number and go home with her. Like, I mean, and I agree with you. It's because she was so freaking connected. I mean, she was having the most fun of anybody in the room. And it was amazing. And you're right. You connect with that music and you can really feel it. We went to the Alanis Morissette concert and she opened for her. And I'm like, man, like, she's not an opener,
But that's Joan. Think about Joan Jett. She started in her teens.
Right.
There's no other version of her. Some of us have to accept that that's what we're meant to do. And the abuse comes in when we're not being that. It's actually, I was more worse to myself in between tours. Couldn't stand myself. I didn't want to be home. What am I going to do? I still struggle with that. I'm not jumping from city to city right now playing guitar. Not in a boo-hoo way. I'm just, it's ingrained. Yeah. It's like, it's who you are. Yeah. So Joan Jett's been doing this forever. And she's awesome, and that's who she is. I'm so glad she figured out a way to continue to do this and just be Joan Jett, because that's all she has to be.
And it was so badass, too, because, I've always loved Joan Jett, but it was no one that I thought I would really, see live, maybe just, whatever. But I've always just loved her for her story and what she represents and all of the things very personally, politically, all the things aligned with all things Joan Jett. But when I saw her, it literally took me off my feet. And I kept sitting there going, why do I love this so much? And it's because she was so connected to herself and so authentic and real. And the stickers on her guitar, at some point I found myself literally looking at everything on her body and her guitar and her band, and it's all so intentional and meaningful, and nothing is an accident, nothing is like oops, didn't mean to do that. And it just was great. I was like, oh man, there's still somebody else performing. Shit.
Yeah, she was a teenager in the Runaways, and she was the real beast that was in the Runaways, the punk rock energy. They were all punk in their own aspect, but she's the riffs. It's not unapologetic reckless playing, but cool.
But you say reckless, but so intentional.
Yes.
Well,
she was so present.
You could be intentionally reckless.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You're not worried about what's going to happen next. It's what the thing you're doing now is getting punched. Yeah. It's like an exclamation point. Everything you do.
Yep, and I do think that, and I've always felt this way. I do think that there are big similarities between sports and arts. I mean, more so. As society, we have this sort of stigma on each. Like sports is macho, whatever. And then music is oh yes, we're gonna eat some mushrooms and whatever. But that's all just put on there. I mean, if you really really break it down, everything that we're talking about as far as sports too, it all makes sense. You have to think when you were in a fight or whatever, it looks so chaotic, but you've talked to me about how you would get in a fight and shake each other's hands. It's a performance, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's intentional.
It was staged too. So,
yeah. But I would say that, your really heavy drinking probably came from a lot of that hockey, not like wanting to continue that afterwards
Could
too.
be. Yeah.
Because I've seen you struggle a lot just with us being married, and like you'll see people playing sports and stuff, and I can see that in you where you really like you miss
Sure.
that, but you also hate it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I get both ends of it. That's for sure.
Like you hate just skating around the ice rink, but
No,
I
I
bet you
wanna do
anything
other
you would
shit.
love to go back and like play. It's the same thing. Like I can't stand singing for like two people. It's like awkward, right? But the bigger the audience, the more in it you
Mhm.
are.
Yeah.
Because
That
it's
makes
more
sense.
immersive.
Adrenaline and a dopamine
Yeah.
rush.
100%. Well, let me get you out of here with one last question.
Well, did you get
Kind of
all
a
your
light-
questions in? You said a bunch of.
Yeah,
I mean,
trust me.
you could hit them.
We could talk
If you
for
have
a
a little
long,
bit
long,
more,
long-
we could fire off your quickies and alcoholism.
We'll probably do like a
You're
part
an equal
2.
participant.
But I wanted to get you out here on a kind of a lighthearted question that we ask all our guests.
Mm-hmm.
And you being a world tour, surely you have a funny, just kind of a random place or a story that involves you back in your drinking days, that involves you peeing that you can remember.
Drunken
Peeing?
pee.
Drunken pee story.
Drunken
Yes.
pee story. I mean, not as great as Ozzy and the Alamo, of course.
No.
Set the bar just a little bit lower. Just a little bit lower.
Well, a drunken pee story is a pretty low bar to begin with.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know if.
He's like, I don't know if I have one, or maybe I just don't remember.
No, the ones I have aren't necessarily funny. They're funny now. I'm trying to remember. Like, there's on tour drunken pee stories. You ask everybody this question.
It doesn't have to
Doesn't
be.
have to be on tour.
It doesn't have to be on tour. So while you're thinking, I'll give you the origin story
Yeah.
behind
Maybe
this
give me
question.
some other ways people have done it. Yeah.
So, okay. We are in Dallas. We're having dinner with my brother because he lives in Dallas and his sober friends as well, right? And I'm the only normie. When you said that, that's, I'm the only normie.
Oh, yeah.
And I proceeded to tell this story that I thought was really funny of us going to Asheville for our anniversary or something, and Ryan getting drunk and just peeing in the middle of the hotel room floor. Just, I have to pee. Think I'll do it right here.
Yes.
And it got zero reaction from the people at the table. And they're like, yeah, that sounds like a normal Tuesday in my drinking life. And I was like, so I'm the only one, or like my brother, like going and opening the door and like pissing in my laundry hamper and then shutting it and walking out the room, They're like, yeah, that
Yeah.
things always smell like pee.
Those are all real.
and-
I've heard
And
about
then
some of
they
that.
proceeded. They're like, oh, that's nothing. He just peed on the floor. Like, that's like nothing. And so they proceeded for everybody to tell their stories. And I realized that I really was, the odd one out because,
Everybody has a story.
everybody-
Or many.
I probably have
Pee
too many.
story.
So okay, this makes more sense now. One of them goes back to, because there's so many. The one that I could think of was the earliest funny pee story. I was drunk at 20 years old at an Ozzy concert on his Retirement Sucks tour. That's when after he was supposed to retire, the first time he came back in the mid 90s, right when Ozfest started, but it was the year before.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember going into the bathroom, and and drunk was still it wasn't like a new feeling, but maybe I was younger. I might have been 18. If it was Ozfest, oh shit, yeah, it was probably 18, 19. And I look at a line of people against the the urinals, but then I'm blurry drunk, and I see a bunch of white porcelain that nobody's really at. So I just go over there and start to pee, and I realize I'm peeing in the sink. But the part was somebody walking up next to me in another sink, watching. I was like, "Great show, right, bro?" I'm like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Why is he bending over?" I'm like,
He's washing his hands.
I'm peeing in the sink. At least it wasn't the same sink as him. And the idea is, I guess at an Ozzy concert is probably the least that could be problematic.
Yeah, that's right.
But most of the time, that one I could say is funny. I think they're all funny to me, but they're all like confusing and sordid too. Like, you just like don't know where you are. I thought I was locked in a room, and like I literally dumped out all like my vitamins into like my bag, and then like tried to pee in a big vitamin bottle, and realizing now I'm running out of space, like one of those. Like that's happened more
Now
than once.
what?
And then I realized like, oh, the door is right there. You know.
Could have just done that. Yeah.
I will say this before we go. I notice, now that I've been able to research it enough, a huge difference between we ask that question to men versus women. Because y'all have such a relationship with your, and peeing that you're like, where have I not peed?
Oh yeah, that's that part too. Is like, like you're saying, like there's ways, like the in-between ways that might be funny for you. Or I mean, a woman's experience where it's like, dude, I've peed everywhere. The backs of buildings, by dumpsters, like pull over, and like. So I guess there's a variable of like we have to really be doing some wild shit, like not knowing where we are, peeing in the middle of the room, peeing in a vitamin jar. Oh, this is a hamper, must be a toilet, like things like that. Because the idea of just peeing in random places is like, there's a lot of peeing around. I mean, there's the whole joke. Any weird colored bottle or cup in a venue, just stay away from. Because people pee. There's no bathroom backstage. You're peeing in a bottle.
Yep.
So maybe we need to take that into consideration moving forward. Because for a girl to just pee in a random place, it's not just to whip it out. Right. I mean, you're exiting said place with piss all over you.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying not to do. We don't want to get caught, and we don't want it on us. Otherwise, like it worked.
Evidence all over. That's right.
Well, lucky you.
I call it nature's bathroom. If you can make it to the side of the grass or the woods, it's like there's no fear. It's not windy. We're good.
That's great. I love it.
STATiC, thank you so much for joining the show, brother.
Well, I was happy to be here. So I hope I hit some of your questions, though. I know our alcohol was danced upon just life experience, but that really is what it is.
It is, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we try to keep everything lighthearted. So,
quick question for you guys: do you live in Texas?
Yeah. No, Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee.
Knoxville.
Yeah, we're really not that. Yeah.
Well, we're further now, sadly, because we lost the direct roadway.
Yeah, for now,
because it was quick. Knoxville was like. Then I started to do the climb because when I played Nashville last time, I was coming into Knoxville. First time I did that because normally being from the East Coast or touring, you go like very across the country.
Sure.
But since I was jumping on shows with my old band, we left Nashville, went back to Greenville, South Carolina, and I never actually done that. I mean, I've done so many roads, but that particular one was like, this is amazing. It's so beautiful, and up and down, and then I'm like this really windy road, which I love that, and I was like, wow, we're really close to Knoxville. Which I do see it in the map. Everyone's like, you're in South Carolina, you're by the beach. I'm like, no, I might as well just tell you I'm from North Carolina because I'm 30 minutes from the North Carolina border. Yeah. Our barbecue is different up here than it is in the downstate. We have North Carolina influence upstate barbecue. Or they say it's their own barbecue. Don't tell someone. I can't say that. We have South Carolina upstate barbecue. We might be related to North Carolina, but we are upstate.
But you have your own.
Yeah, I'll get my friends pissed at me.
I'm from Texas, grew up in Texas, and then I went to high school and college in North Carolina, so I totally get the North Carolina barbecue, and then landed in Tennessee.
And Tennessee
We've kind of
barbecue.
been all over the place. Yeah.
Memphis barbecue. I don't want to call it Tennessee barbecue. Memphis has their own, but not Tennessee.
Especially where you guys are, you might be influenced again by the Blue Ridge barbecue. They claim South Carolina upstate is close to Texas for some reason. So maybe historically there was some kind of business going on. They pride themselves in like the dry rubs. I don't know. I'll eat barbecue anywhere, anytime. I don't even have to ask questions. Same. I see smoke, I pull over.
That's right. That's right.
Same.
Smoke.
Same. That's us.
You know where you are? Barbecue. That's the best. Like you're on a weird side street. Like anytime I get a detour, my mind immediately goes back to like, oh, we're on a detour. We're gonna find barbecue.
Yeah.
And we're gonna see some little spot. It's gonna be a gas station that has brisket. My best brisket in Texas was in a gas station on the way to El Paso. There's nothing on the way to El Paso.
You see somebody like on the side of the road with their smoker hooked up to the back of their truck. You know what I mean? It's like a 1980 nothing truck, and they're just cooking it on the side of the road with their mangy dog.
So good.
Best damn barbecue you'll ever have.
Always.
Oh yeah. 100%.
It's got heart. It's got love. Awesome.
That's right.
Well, thank you for answering those questions.
All right. Thanks,
well, talk to you guys soon.
Appreciate it, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye now.
If you love the podcast, which I know you do, please like, subscribe,
and hit that notification bell to get notified every time we post.
That's right. Dropping them, baby.